Hello everyone, this is Johnny and welcome back. In today's video, I want to share with you some of my favorite tools that I personally use when propagating Japanese maples. And I want to start with tools that I personally use while grafting. Now, I do want to make mention that many of these products, the ones that are available on Amazon, I will link below with Amazon affiliate links. And if you purchase any of those products with those Amazon affiliate links, Amazon will give me a commission, which helps support this channel at no extra cost to you. With that being said, though, these particular maples to my left are ones that I propagated last summer. This is an Acer palmatum peaches and cream that I grafted onto this seed-grown rootstock, and you can see that it's healing up very nicely. And then this is an amber ghost, Acer palmatum amber ghost, that once again was grafted last summer onto this seed-grown rootstock. I've had good success so far with summer grafting, and last year was my first year to do that, and that went well, and you can see here those are doing well so far. Now, when it comes to grafting, of course, you're going to be using sharp tools. And so I recommend that you pick up some cut-resistant gloves, like for instance these that I got on Amazon last year. And I personally use these because I like to protect my fingers when you're using sharp tools. You still have to be careful, even with these gloves on, but these do add another layer of protection for you. Now, when it comes to the pruners that I use, you can obviously use these for a lot of different things, but you obviously need to cut a scion off of the mother tree. And I think actually in 2021, I purchased these pruners right here, and they're made by a Japanese brand called Tonma. I think that's how you say it, T-O-N-M-A. But made in Japan, really high quality pruners, and they're not that expensive. They are available on Amazon, and I like them so much that I now have two pair because I wanted a backup pair. But these have stayed sharp since I purchased them, and they've been great. They're good for cutting even larger branches, even larger than this, but this is just one example from another maple tree, not a Japanese maple tree, but another maple tree in my yard. And you can see just how easily they cut through things like that. Extremely sharp, really good pruners. Now, once you cut your scion, you're obviously going to need to take that scion and cut, like I've shown you in the past, maybe like 20-degree angle there and a little bit less of an angle right there, and give yourself kind of a flat area to go ahead and splice onto your rootstock. In order to do that, you could take a knife and cut that at the various angles, and a lot of people do that. But I've had good success with this particular tool, which is a Zenport tool, and I'm not sure the exact name for it, but it's made for cutting scions. And there's various ways that you can cut scions with this, but the way that I use this is for the side veneer grafting. Okay, so these blades are extremely sharp, so you obviously should have some kind of gloves on to protect yourself, and you don't really get your fingers near there, but nonetheless, when handling a tool like this, it's good to have some gloves on like this, and there are sharp points here on this tool. But you unlock this, you take the branch that you want to be your scion, and you slip that in this little notch right there. So it has that little notch, and you angle it such that you can see that the blade's gonna cut in like that, and it cuts that nice flat end for you there. So this particular branch is probably, and it's hard to estimate, it's less than 1/4 inch, maybe just slightly less than 1/4 of an inch or so. And so we got the one end, but you also need to notch the back end a little bit. So you can also take the same tool and just go a little further up on the tool. So it has like this guide here, and you can find the spot where it looks like the angle is going to be good, and go ahead and cut that back notch. So you can see just with those two motions, I now have a good clean scion cut that I can graft on to a rootstock. So if this were an example of a rootstock, I could now cut my side veneer into that, put that in, and you can see that you would have a good clean flat union. And it's important that when you're grafting, you have a really nice clean cut, and you want to be able to do that in one cut if possible, like there, one cut there, one cut there. And because you don't want to damage this cambium layer, that green layer, when you're grafting on. So you can see that this tool is very useful for that. It's not super cheap, but it is available on Amazon, and it could give you better success in grafting if you picked up a tool like that. So that's a great tool that I definitely recommend to you. When it comes to actually cutting into the rootstock, I personally use just a box cutter. You can actually buy specific knives for that, but I like the box cutter because A, the blade is fixed, but B, it's easy to put sharp blades back in this. So if you just buy a high quality box cutter, use some kind of protective gloves, then you can use that to cut into your particular rootstock to graft this on. But when it comes to the sharp tools I use, once again, the Tanma made in Japan pruners, which have lasted really well for me. These I bought in 2021, and they are doing extremely well still. I use those a lot. Then we have the Zenport tool that's useful for cutting the actual Scions itself. Then we have just any box cutter, and this particular one works well for me. I've had this for a number of years. It's just a Stanley box cutter. Now when it comes to how you actually affix the Scion here onto your rootstock. So what you need to do is you need to get some kind of film. Some people use rubber bands, but I've done well with this particular product, and it's made by Aglis. I think it's a Japanese brand, but Aglis, and it's called Buddy, B-U-D-D-Y, Buddy Tape, Aglis Buddy Tape. It's kind of hard to find, and I don't know if it's on Amazon, but I'll find out. If it's on Amazon, I'll link to that. But I personally purchased this on eBay, I think last summer. But I've had good luck with this Aglis Buddy Tape. I did notice that AM Leonard does have a similar product that they sell, and I haven't tested it personally, but it's probably good as well. But what this is really good for, and let me take this off for a second, but this film, and you can buy this where it's pre-cut, pre-perforated, I should say, with little lines here, and you can tear it off. But I personally bought the roll that's just continuous. And you can take this, and let me grab some scissors here. And I'm just going to use this for an example. I haven't cut into this, but I'm just going to use this for an example here. But you go ahead and you just take this tape, something like that, and it is stretchy and self-clinging. So you can take it and you can stretch that around your Scion to not only keep water out of that graft union, but also to affix it as well. And then of course you could continually wrap that, you would want to layer it down here as well. And it not only holds it tight, but it also keeps the water from getting in there as well. So you wrap that a few times, and I'll put a video overlay showing me doing that process last summer. But this Buddy Tape, or similar tape, stretchy, self-clinging tape, has worked really well for me. So I definitely recommend something like this when you're doing grafting. I wouldn't worry about grafting wax and rubber bands. I mean, you personally could, but I think this is a lot easier product, especially for beginners. So when it comes to grafting, those are the basic tools that I use. I did want to make mention, I'll go ahead and mention this now, another product that I like to use, and I've mentioned this in several videos, but I recently came across, I believe, an effective way to label my trees. So obviously when you graft a tree on, if you grow from seed, if you do any kind of cuttings, you want to go ahead and label your plants. Not only for your reference, but if you're selling plants, it's really important. So I have purchased these little plant markers right here, and I get these on Amazon as well, and I'll link to those below. And instead of just writing on these with like a Sharpie, because that fades after maybe just a month or two, depending on how it gets light and water. Even a Sharpie doesn't stay on this permanently. It only stays for a few months and it fades. I found these laser printer labels that are actually waterproof. And I use my laser printer and I print on these labels, and I affix that, I peel these off, affix this to this, and it gives me a good long-lasting plant tag that looks, pretty professional, generally speaking. And it has, like, for instance, this is Japanese maple, Acer palmatum, peaches and cream. And then I can stick that in, and that should last several years like that before having any issues. And I'm just testing these out. I'll report how well they last, but so far they haven't had any issues over the last few months, and they're doing well for me. So I believe this is going to be a good long-term option for you to do that. Let's now move over to some of the pots that I like to use when growing from seed. Okay, in front of me I have a number of Japanese maples that are grown from seed. These are some ones that sprouted this spring, and I have these in little 2.5-inch pots, which I'm experimenting with this year to use these smaller pots. And so far I'm liking it because these look healthy, they're doing well. And these, in many ways, are growing up sometimes faster than some of the ones in bigger square pots. Now, these are a year old, so these are older. That's why they look bigger. But I'm doing well so far with these smaller pots. This allows me to fit 32 in one of these 10-20 trays versus 18 of these particular ones. So this is still a great option, but I can fit a lot more in this particular tray. But these little pots are useful, and these little trays here are useful as well. I put these in webbed trays, so I'll show you the bottom of this. These are 10-20 web trays. And the web trays are great because it allows for excellent drainage. And they allow you to put, once again, 32 of these in one of these, and it allows you to put 18 of these 3.5-inch pots. I have them labeled here in the front, and here are some 3.5-inch pots that I use. So they're like 3.5-inch on the top, 3.5-inch, and I'm not sure how tall they are, but they're roughly 3.5 inches to 4 inches tall as well. These are really nice because they're soft. They actually last longer than you would think, but they're easy to transplant. When you're ready to transplant this, I'm not ready yet, you can just pop out the soil like that without really disturbing the roots, because you can loosen up the pot itself. But these are great, these kind of soft plastic ones, and most of the time they last quite a long time. So those are handy. I definitely recommend some kind of trays and some kind of little pots like this, and I'll link to some that are similar to these that I use. And then as trees get older, or for instance, these particular ones that I grew from cuttings, and I'll talk about cutting tools in just a little bit, but these particular ones are in a little bit larger pot, and these are 5.5-inch by 5.5-inch by roughly 6 inches, and you can fit 8 of these in one of these 10-20 trays, and they fit really nicely. And it allows you to use space very efficiently, much more efficiently than the round pots. But square pots are definitely the way to go. Now when it comes to filling your trays with soil, I've mentioned this in several videos, but I really like this galvanized scoop that I purchased, and it's technically made for scooping animal feed, but it works really well for scooping soil and then pouring it over a tray of pots, whether that be larger pots, smaller pots, whatever. But it's a really efficient way to scoop soil and put that in. So when it comes to growing from seed and potting up, these are the basic trays that I like to use. Now let's move over to some of the tools I like to use when doing cuttings for Japanese maples. Beyond growing Japanese maples from seed and by grafting, you can also grow Japanese maples by making cuttings and rooting those cuttings. Here's a particular Acer palmatum amber ghost that I rooted, and this particular one is doing really well. You can see a lot of new growth here, and you will have a lot of people say that you can't grow good healthy trees, Japanese maple trees, by cuttings. However, I've found that certain varieties do well. Like for instance, Amber Ghost. So far I've had really good luck with Amber Ghost, Orangiola, and a number of other Acer palmatum varieties that have done really well with cuttings and are growing healthy trees. But it's definitely a valid way to propagate Japanese maples, and it's definitely worth the time in my personal opinion. But when it comes to the tools that I use, first of all, you obviously need to have some kind of sharp pruners, and I talked about these, but I use these made in Japan pruners. Those have worked really well for me. Then of course you'll need some kind of box or tray to put those in. This is what I personally use, and it's a nice little easy to maintain setup here. But I have a clear bin, and on the top I've drilled 3 holes, you can see there, somewhere around an inch, inch and a quarter holes, 3 of them, to allow some airflow, because I don't want this to be completely closed off to breed bacteria, mildew, fungus, etc. But this lid easily comes off. It's clear on all sides. And then on the bottom, it takes a little bit of time, but I drilled a bunch of little holes to make sure that this drains really well. And then what you can do is you put about 5 inches of medium, and I'll talk about the medium that I use for Japanese maples, but you put about 5 inches of medium in here, stick in your Japanese maple cuttings, and then you put on the lid and keep it in a bright spot that doesn't get direct sun and keep that misted. And this works really well. If you have a greenhouse, you probably don't need a setup like this, but since I don't have a greenhouse, this works really well for me. So I definitely recommend something like this. Give this a shot if you don't have a greenhouse, and it's a good inexpensive way to root your cuttings. And you can use it for other things, not just Japanese maples, but this is also what I use for Japanese maples. Now, when it comes to the medium itself that I use, I have experimented with a couple different things, but I found beyond like just using potting soil, what works better for me and what I've had the best success with so far is a mix of 50% peat and 50% perlite. And so I mix these two together in roughly 50% of each, mix that together and then put that in one of those trays, and that's what I use as my medium. You can usually get these products in most areas of the world. Just look for the peat moss, and I like to buy from a brand that is sustainable, that has sustainable practices, and usually peat moss from Canada is more sustainable because they have a lot of laws there in Canada that regulate this industry. And then perlite. It's kind of a very light, kind of pumicey material. Both of these hold water really well and are pretty sterile, so you shouldn't have a lot of fungus and bacteria growing, but that's a good rooting medium. That's something that I use. Instead of using the plastic tray, you could use a tray like this. I would probably want something a little deeper, but you can also buy propagating trays that have holes in them, like this. That's a pretty short tray, or taller trays, and you could put the rooting medium in here. This, for instance, is what I used when propagating lavender this year, and I recently published that video and showed you that. But then you can take this, and one of these bins flipped over actually fits right over this tray, and you can use that as kind of like a greenhouse effect as well. Okay, beyond the box and the medium itself, you'll also need to use with Japanese maples some kind of rooting hormone to really encourage roots. Some other plants don't require that, and some root easier than others, but Japanese maples, to increase your success, you definitely want to use some kind of rooting hormone. In the past, I've used a rooting hormone powder, but I found that this rooting hormone gel has worked better for me. So this is a brand called Midas Hydro. It's an IBA rooting hormone gel, and this has worked well for me. And I definitely use protective gloves when I handle this product to make sure I don't get it on my fingers. And this is available on Amazon. I will link to that below. You need to have some kind of misting setup. So if you don't have an automatic misting setup, I don't have an automatic setup. If you don't have a greenhouse with that setup, you'll need to mist your cuttings several times a day. Overall, the sprayer has worked well for me, but I did want to mention two quick things. First of all, anytime you open this, you need to release the pressure here with this valve. So you can see there, release that. And then I've noticed that you have to get this lid pretty tight in order for it not to leak here. So that's a slight negative there. I don't know if maybe they could put a better seal at the top, but it doesn't leak once you get it tight. But you have to get it tight enough that it actually makes it a little harder to undo it. It's not a big deal, but it's a little tighter there. And so that's a slight negative. And then also last year, after the first week or two, I had an issue with it start not pumping properly. And I actually just had to come here, take this off, and lube the little grommet, the little rubber slider grommet that goes in there, and then it has worked well since then. So you might have to occasionally pop this open and lube that to keep this working really well. But I keep it indoors, keep it out of the sun. But nonetheless, this has been a pretty decent sprayer for me, and I'll link to it below. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about protecting your Japanese maple seedlings and young plants from harsh direct sun. As I've mentioned in past videos, when you're growing Japanese maples, even some of the mature varieties do require some protection from the hot afternoon sun. And so I use shade cloth. Now in the past, I just built some kind of frame to put the shade cloth over my plants, and then I clamped them with little clamps. But it was kind of messy. It didn't look that great. Well, this year, I purchased on Amazon this track and wiggle wire. And these two together allow me to have a nice, clean look, like a custom size shade cloth in a sense, and make it much cleaner and tidier. So instead of clamping these on, how this particular thing works is you can stick your shade cloth on the track, and then you take this wiggle wire, and it's a pretty cool thing, but you literally just stick this in and then start feeding it in, and it snaps. So you can see there, like this snaps in there, snaps in there, snaps in there. Sorry, I messed it up there, but snaps in there, snaps in there, snaps in there. And then you can see as you go across here, you can snap the other end and you have a nice taut end. And then you can come here and just trim off the excess. This is what is used commonly in greenhouses to attach the plastic and shade cloth, etc. But this is a really good tool that if you're building some kind of canopy to protect your Japanese maples from sun, and you need a specific size shade cloth for that, looks very clean, you could use wiggle wire, something like this, to protect that. This comes in like a little bit over 6-foot strips, and then it's made out of aluminum. So with like a hacksaw, you can trim it to the size you want, and you can drill holes in it with a good drill bit to affix this to whatever you need to. But that's a handy tool. I recommend probably somewhere around a 50% at least shade cloth for your Japanese maples, and then you can use the wiggle wire and track to go ahead and affix this above your Japanese maples in a nice clean way. I do plan to publish, and I hope to record this later on today, a tutorial video showing you this particular product in an actual application covering my Japanese maples. Well, I hope all that was very helpful to you. As a reminder, once again, I'm going to link down below in the video description with any of these products that are available, or similar products that are available on Amazon with affiliate links. And when you purchase products using those links, that does help support this channel at no extra cost to you. Once again, until next time, thank you so much.